Hey friends, it's Amanda from the Inky Panda, and today we're going to be talking about the Copperplate basic strokes. This video is the first in a three-part series in which I go through each individual stroke and give you my own personal tips and tricks on how I execute each one. In this video, we're going to be talking about the entry and exit stroke, the oval, and the overturn. So make sure you have your favorite calligraphy supplies, and let's get started.
Okay, so the first thing we need to do before we actually talk about the strokes themselves is to review and understand the guidelines. There are 6 lines that you need to keep in mind whenever you're reviewing Copperplate. There is the second descending line, the first ascending line, header line, the base line, the first descending line, and the second descending line. The space between your header line and your base line is considered your X height, and this is where the majority of your letters will live. Occasionally you'll have some strokes, as you can see here, which go above the header line or below the base line, and we'll go through those slowly one by one. So the first stroke that we're going to review is called the entry or exit stroke. I would say it's deceptively simple, and to be honest with you, when I first started my Copperplate journey, I actually skipped it completely. I figured it was too easy. I figured it was not exactly what you would call awe-inspiring or particularly pretty, which is what I wanted to do, get right to the pretty stuff. And I figured that I'd have no problems with it. Little did I know that it's actually one of the most essential strokes to consistent spacing between your letters and also the overall aesthetics of your script. So let's go through this one slowly, and I'll talk to you step by step about all the key points that I have about making this stroke. The first thing is that the stroke starts at the baseline, travels in a hairline fashion, completely hairline, no shade, all the way up to the header line, and then it stops. Now you can see why I thought it was easy. This stroke, it helps to think of it actually as a part of another one of the basic strokes, which we're actually going to review later on, which is the underturn. I would say that consistency is key. You're looking to have the part of this stroke fall on the 55-degree slant, which is what these lines are in this case, but not all of it, because part of it has to make the curve, and then it becomes straight onto the 55-degree slant. So let's go through one together. I'll show you real time how I would go through it, and we'll do maybe 2 or 3. The next stroke that we're going to talk about is the oval. This is considered to be the key stroke of the whole script. The width of this oval is the basis for the width of every other stroke and every other letter that you're going to be using throughout your writing. So this is something that we're going to need to focus on as a Copperplate calligrapher and make sure that you're comfortable with it. Take the time to practice it. You might need to do several at once, review which ones you like, what you don't like, continue to try and improve this oval. So let's go through the steps that you're going to need to do and to consider all of the important points. So this stroke, I started at 12 o'clock, which would be right at the top here. I continue down counterclockwise in an oval form. Once I reach the baseline, then I start going back up to the header line and I stop where I started. Other calligraphers, some of them choose to do it around 2 or 3 o'clock. They go up and around and then they finish there. It's your preference where you want to start. I choose to do 12 o'clock because I find that it's more consistent when I'm working on different letters to start it at the same position versus starting it in different positions depending on the letter. As you begin to make your curve, you're starting here at 12 o'clock as a hairline. As you're beginning to make your curve, you're still a hairline for the time that you are off the slant. Remember, this is 55 degrees, and this is where the pressure follows on a shade. So once you meet that 55 degrees, that's when you're adding pressure. And then as you're getting down to the baseline, you're going to release pressure and taper back down again. As you can see here, we're continuing as a hairline. You touch the baseline at the bottom of your oval, and then you continue all the way back up in a hairline. There's no shades on this part. Some scripts stylistically have shades, but we're not going to talk about that in this video. The right side of this downstroke, which is the shade, as you can see, it's actually relatively straight. It follows the 55 degrees. The far side, which is the left side, in this case, is where the curve of the shade is. So your tine actually sweeps out this way, but this one stays straight. The way that I achieve that is I actually take my nib and my pen and I rotate it just slightly to the right. So that way when I use pressure, the left one is the one that moves, as you can see here. And the right one is the one that stays planted and continues in the straight line on the 55 degrees. The widest part of your shade should be near the middle of this area here. As you can see, it's kind of equally as thin on the top as it is on the bottom. So let's go through a couple for practice before we move on to the next one. Starting at 12 o'clock, you're staying a hairline, apply pressure, release pressure, hairline to the top. Starting at 12 o'clock again, hairline, pressure, pressure, release pressure, hairline, hairline, back up to the top. The next stroke that we're going to talk about is the overturn. Sometimes I struggle with having this stroke be too wide at the base, which I find makes it look kind of peaked like a little hill. So I do recommend that when you're proceeding through the shade of this stroke, to stay slow and be mindful of your position in relation to the rest of the stroke. So this stroke is only as tall as your X height. It falls entirely between your header line and your baseline. You begin at the baseline, proceed upwards in a hairline until you reach about halfway to 2/3 up from the header line. Once you reach that position, that's when you start to do the curve of your overturn. The tallest point or the peak of your curve should be right where it meets the header line. As you're proceeding down on the other side, you're still staying a hairline until you reach the 55 degree slant. Once you reach that portion, that's when you apply the pressure. This helps to make sure that the top of your overturn doesn't seem too heavy and remains delicate. So you can see with this stroke, it's actually the right hand side of the shade that's curved, while the left side remains straight on the 55 degree slant. In the previous stroke, the oval, we talked about how rotating your nib and your tines helps to control which side of the tines are moving. So instead of rotating it to the right, which is what we did in the previous stroke, we're actually going to rotate it to the left just slightly. That way, it's the left tine that stays planted, while the right tine is the one that separates and makes that nice curve. Then when you reach the baseline, you release pressure slowly and the right tine slides back over to meet the left, giving you your squared bottom that you finish the stroke off with. So let's do that again, just so you can see. Now, the width of this stroke is only as wide as your oval, which was the stroke that we talked about before. So if you imagine there is an oval that fits right inside here, that's how wide this stroke should be. If you have a wider oval, this stroke should be wider, and vice versa. If you have a narrow oval, this should be a very narrow stroke. So let's practice a couple of them together. Begin at the baseline, stay a hairline, going up, curve. The peak of your curve should be right at the header line. Then you apply pressure when you're on the 55 degrees and release. Squared bottom. Now, if you miss your squared bottom, don't be afraid to touch it up when you're finished. There's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't feel like you haven't executed the stroke properly. It's impossible to be perfect 100% of the time, so don't be afraid if you feel that it needs to be just a little bit sharper. You can always touch it up afterwards.
Thanks for visiting my studio today. Leave me a message in the comments below about any other future topics you'd like me to cover. Don't forget to check out the other videos in this series, which review other basic strokes that we didn't talk about in this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye, friends.